Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of We Need to Talk. I could not be more excited about my guest today. He is an award-winning marketing professional, an activist, a philanthropist, and the author of the New York Times bestseller, The Black Friend, Mr. Frederick Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me on the show, Fred.
The pleasure is all mine.
So I've been so excited to talk to you ever since we met at the Yahoo Allyship Pledge, because you said so many things that I aligned with. But even after reading your book, I felt so validated in my own personal experiences, because I grew up in Santa Barbara. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's an aggressively white town. So that's the only way I know how to describe it. And you know, a lot of the things you wrote, I obviously aligned with. And I know that like our experiences for Black people that grow up in predominantly white towns, we're not anomalies in that sense, but it was this odd sense of just comfort reading your words, because I could have easily written them myself. And I just love how candid and open you were. And I really appreciate your willingness and kind of the emotional work that you had to go through to even write that book.
Yeah.
Which I know is a lot, you know, and we're gonna get into that. But there are so many other things that I also want to talk to you before we even get into talking about your book, because even following you on social media, you continuously say things that I'm like, yep. So looking at just where we are now, and, you know, we're finally, thank God, at the end of the Donald Trump era. And I know there's always been kind of in general this pushback with Biden and Kamala as a whole. And they definitely were not my first choice, but I was just in the get Donald Trump out by any means necessary camp. But, you know, when it comes to the current administration, and, you know, they've only been here a couple weeks, but are you hopeful that there is going to be tangible change that's going to occur, but more specifically in ways that's going to impact the Black community positively?
I mean, you know, it's interesting because I'm hoping so. You know, they weren't my first choices. I basically voted for them because it was, you know, get Trump out. And that was my focus, as well as the focus of countless other people. But I'm hoping that they actually do something, right? Like, and they have the ability to. I'm wary, but I want to be surprised.
Mm-hmm. And are you one of the people that was like a critic of their past? You know, how much do you hold their past against them?
I suppose yes. I don't think that someone's beholden. I don't think someone's potential future is beholden to their past. But I do think that you have to have accountability. And to be quite frank, I don't think that either of them has ever truly had accountability for the things that they've done in the but again, ultimately, I don't think that they're the worst possibility. You know, we got the worst out.
Right, for sure.
But I am very big on accountability, and therefore I hold them accountable for their actions.
Absolutely. And, you know, this is just who I am, but I tend to lean on the side of just like giving people grace and giving people a chance to change. And what do you think is a reasonable amount of time to be like, okay, these people are either going to do something or they're not?
You know, for me, I think it's 100 days. You know, I'm a very big Elizabeth Warren supporter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was a surrogate of hers. And I was also a surrogate for Bernie. And they've outlined plans of things that, hey, like if I was president, you can do these things in 100 days. And I'm like, well, if we can do those things in 100 days, get them done, right? You know, for example, we look at student loans. You know, we're in a pandemic right now and an economic recession. And something like canceling student loans, even if it was $50K, not everybody's complete student loans, but it would be an economic booster, especially economically marginalized, such as Black and brown people. It would be a major weight and burden off of our backs, right? So I want to see that done. And the fact that I'm not hearing that happen, you know, and potentially happening is deeply troubling.
You know, I have to admit, I was very ignorant until recently for what student loan forgiveness could truly mean for people. But even in my research, and I think a lot of people are, I think when they hear student loan forgiveness, they automatically have that attitude. It's like, well, I paid for college. Why do these people not get to have to pay for college? But when you think of it as a whole, and in the research that I've done, it's like, how much it would close the racial wealth gap is just astronomical. And it's such a huge step. And so like, I'm totally for it just in doing research. And I really hope that more people will do research to see how much of a positive thing it is and not focus on, yes, we all paid for college, but we're trying to move forward,
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You're looking at, I mean, it's education in this country is at the intersection of everything wrong, everything oppressing, Black and brown people. So with doing something like you said, there's obviously a financial burden that's lifted, by canceling student loans, but more so than that, there's also, access that then becomes available to using money to buy homes, using money to pay off other debts, using money to send someone else to school, so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
It's systemic.
Absolutely. So I want to backtrack a little bit and get your thoughts, because you've posted about performative activism quite a bit. And it's, in the last year, we've definitely seen it become a common reoccurrence with companies and just people and influencers. And I know you had some thoughts about Harriet Tubman being on the $20 bill, and I had some thoughts about that as well. And I also don't know if you saw the recent rollout of the Black Pride Watch from Apple. Did you see that?
I saw it in passing. There's been a lot going on.
Well, first of all, it's hideous. It's hideous, but that's even besides the point. It's what they were trying to do. But anyways, I think for me, what I've been so annoyed by these actions, and I'm sure that you agree with this, is that majority of the actions that are being taken really have nothing to do with anything that Black people have been asking for. And I think that after George Floyd was murdered, all of these companies, they are posting Black squares and, making statements and wanting to do this and that for Black people. But it's kind of like, you go to a restaurant and you order a burger and then they bring you tacos. It's like, I love tacos, but that's not what I asked for, So I just want to hear your thoughts on that, because I know that you have thoughts on performative activism.
Yeah, well, I mean, working backwards, you're 100% right. Like in terms of like, this is just not what was asked for. And I think the issue also is that it's not just, white people doing it. A lot of it is being, generated and upheld by other Black people, right? Like when you look at something like Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer and them kneeling in the Capitol Rotunda, that was, if I'm not mistaken, that was
wearing kente cloth, mind you.
Wearing kente cloth. That was Jim Clyburn's idea, right? The same way they were talking about making the Black national anthem like a national hymn and to heal the racial divide, and that's also Clyburn's idea. This is not what we asked for. We asked for you to stop shooting us, right? Like stop shooting us and create access so that we can, close the wealth gap, so that we can close the education gap, so on and so forth. And yeah, so the performative action, like, and I said this yesterday on a call that I had a Zoom I did with a company. I said, your Black squares, for instance, that you posted them for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and somehow somehow they didn't stop Rayshard Brooks from being murdered right after, right? Like these things are not actually stopping anything. It's the same way, for Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, it's great to have a Black woman on a monetary note, maybe, but what does that even matter ultimately if Black women don't have access to those $20 bills?
Right. That's such a valid point. What do you think that they think, though? Like in these little statements and movements, do you think that they actually think it is making a difference?
I don't think that they really care either way. I think that what we've seen time and time again is that people will do anything to keep their worldly possessions, their power, their wealth, their access, so on and so forth, right? It's what you're seeing even in the stock market right now. We have a capitalistic system, and a lot of conservatives and Republicans generally say that they're for quote unquote free market. And what happened recently is that people leaned into capitalism and the idea of a free market and jumped into the stock market.
Yeah,
and they will, and the Dow even went up about 460 points, and they were willing to just like destroy everything in the name of not letting people have stuff, right? So ultimately, it's the same people who are hoarding that wealth that are also hoarding the access and the power from Black people. So no, I don't think that they care, frankly.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but I was just wondering what your thoughts were. I think I think there are some people that have good intentions, but I think in general, people just don't know what to do. So they're like, well, this seems like the easy enough action. So let me just, like you said, post a black square and show that, like, I'm not racist, quote unquote, and maybe that'll be fine. It's the simplest things that they think are going to make a difference, and it's not.
That's literally exactly it. It's let me post this black square because I forget who popularized this term, but it's like our armchair activism, right? It's like to leave not only the comfort of my home, I don't have to even leave the comfort of my Instagram pages that I like or my or whatever, right? Like you don't even have to share. Like a lot of people don't share certain things that I say. They're like, it's too radical, it's too divisive. I'm like, what is radical and divisive about saying like, hey, your black square didn't do anything? There's nothing radical or divisive about that. It's just,
right. Well, and I also think there's nothing political about saying that Black Lives Matter. I mean, that's a whole different conversation, but I've never understood that.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I love that you said that because, Black Lives Matter is literally baseline, right? It's like, saying Black Lives Matter isn't saying like Black lives prosper, nor is it saying Black lives deserve more than yours or anything like that. It's like, hey, like, in the grand scheme of things, like we matter too. Like, please don't kill us. It's so simple and rudimentary. It's such a basic level thing.
So I have a question for you because your background is in marketing. Do you think that phrase should have been rebranded in a sense?
You know what? Like that is an interesting question, and I'll be really transparent. Yeah. I've always been like, I've always loved like, for instance, Black Power to me was the statement, right? It was like, Black Power meant so many things. It meant, Black excellence. It meant Black fortification. It meant Black stability, Black futures, so on and so forth. But I think that Black Lives Matter is kind of like a step backwards from that. Maybe it's like, okay. Well, if this is too much and this is too radical, what if we're just asking for you to not kill us and that we matter ultimately, right? It's interesting in that way. So I would rebrand.
I kind of feel that way about Defund the Police as well. I think people aren't gonna. They hear Defund the Police and they, their mind goes crazy. But if you actually read what Defund the Police stands for, it's nobody's asking you to just get rid of the police department. They're just asking you to reallocate funds. Now, obviously, reallocate funds is not exactly the best branding slogan, but that's just kind of always been my view of it, that like when you have a statement like that, people are just not going to pay attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I know there was a big thing, and that was the issue I had with Obama, actually. I don't mind if people think that something would, like, be better received or more understood if framed differently. But what I do is when you don't come with solutions and you just attack things, right? So, like, Obama saying, like, oh, it's not a good slogan to stand third. I'm like, so what do you think?
So what's the solution, right?
Because if I'm not mistaken, just 4 years ago, Black Lives Matter wasn't a good slogan either.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Say that too. So what do you want?
Yeah, and then you go back and forth and I struggle with this because it's like, well, are we only wanting to rebrand this because we're trying to make white people comfortable? It's basically what it comes down to, right? So yeah, on one hand, it's like, yes, you should have that kind of like poignant, sharp, like shocks factor to the statements, but at the same time, it's like you do want people to listen. So yeah, I don't have a solution either, and I'm supporting Defund the Police. I'm all for Black Lives Matter, obviously, but I can sit back and understand, well, like, okay, I get why people aren't listening to this, but I don't know any other way to say it.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and I think that's what many of us grapple with, right? It's like, because at the end of the day, it's like even with my book, a lot of people who haven't read it think that the book is, inherently for white people. Like, actually, funny enough, if you read the book, it's actually not for, it's white people read it and learn and so on and so forth, but it's actually more so written in a way to help young non-white people know that they are seen and because I needed this book. I think oftentimes, we have to be really transparent and honest about who certain things are for, because if you're going to just when the police doesn't work, well, who doesn't it work for? Say it doesn't work for white people and tell me. Just talk about it. Be honest.
Right. So let's talk about your book, though. So The Black Friend, and I do think it's so well written. I think it's uniquely written. I love all of your little, like, your interstitials, little pauses that you have in there to speak your mind in between the conversations. I love the interviews that you have, and there are definitely people that I'm going to say you need to buy this book and read it, please. But what made you decide to write this when you did? And kind of talk about a little bit about your process just of coming up with the conception to release, just how you came up with the entire idea of The Black Friend.
Yeah, for sure. So it's funny because it was written well before 2020, and which I do take. I have a little problem with a lot of people who like jumped on the like 2020 protest bandwagon of writing race books, because a lot of them don't know what they're talking about, and they're critical. Their critical race theory is lacking. But anyway, back to mine. So I actually was on the train heading to work one morning, and I sat next to this white woman who, and I'm checking the boxes of respectability politics. I'm in a suit, fresh haircut, headphones on, Dean and DeLuca coffee in my hand. I'm rocking that morning. I think I was listening to Whitney too. I'm rocking. I'm in my own zone. It just happened to be there were other seats. Her seat happened to be the one that was closest and available. So I sat down, the one next to her. Mm-hmm. And when I sat down, she was a young white woman. She clutched her purse and got up from the seat and moved next to a white man, and then stared at me the whole time like I was gonna like lunge at her and like rape her or kidnap her or something like that, or rob her. And I deal with things like that pretty often because my fiance and I, we live in a high-rise building here in the city, and for anybody who's non-white who hears that, you probably can imagine in certain spaces which you just deal with on a regular basis, right? Like, yeah. I'm walking around in my hoodie and my Jordans, at times, and you're like, oh my God, who's this? Whatever. But
which you have the right to wear, by the way.
I don't believe in respectability politics personally. Like, that's why I do a lot of interviews wearing hoodies and Scullies and stuff like that. But anyway, so I sat there and I was just staring at her like, like, wow, you are horrible. So I tweeted about the moment, and I was tweeting about, her racism, and, a lot of white people online were like, I'm sorry, this isn't racist. This isn't racism. That's not what racism is. But also a lot of Black people backed them up. They're like, yeah, this isn't racist. She just moved away from, maybe she just, and I was like, it's so interesting. I realized something really deep in that moment. I'm like, we do a great job. No, we don't. We actually don't do a great job of anything, frankly. But we teach a lot about slavery. We teach a lot about the slave trade and the Civil War. And, when it's February, we talk about, some of the more popular figures in Black history. But we don't really talk about the daily manifestations and nuances of racism, right? Like, we don't really have conversations with young people or older people about things like microaggressions. We don't have conversations about systemic trauma. Like, what is it like to be a Black kid in like a white class and be underestimated? Like, how does that impact you, going forward? We don't have those conversations.
And they're really important. And I think what I find so funny is that it's hard to explain when people ask you, well, how do you know that it's racist? It's like, I just know. I don't even know how to explain how, you know what I mean? It's just in our experience, in our upbringing and everything, Black people just know. We just know. And we shouldn't have to explain why. If I tell you that something was racist, trust me on this.
Exactly. It's like, and then it's funny because, obviously you and I follow each other more recently, but, there's a quick story I'll tell you about something like that. Mm-hmm. I rented an Airbnb over the summer with my fiance, my cousin, and my brother. My brother's 9 now. And so we rented this Airbnb in upstate New York. And when we got there, the Airbnb looked beautiful on the pictures they sent there. When we got there, the Airbnb was very nice, in a secluded area on the water, whatever. When I walked in, though, there were a bunch of trinkets and items all over, and like posters and drawings that weren't there before. And they were all of things like kind of like witchcraft, right? And then there were like trinkets of like a dog having sex with a woman, and like devil kind of worship or witchcraft kind of things all over. So I was like, well, we can't stay here, and especially because it's not like I rented the place and that was already there. I'm like, why would you randomly put these things here as
Right.
we're right? And if anybody knows how insidious white supremacy is, I don't underestimate white supremacy ever. I don't underestimate what people will do, especially in the secluded area, whatever. I'm sure you get the point. And I remember tweeting about that, and that experience ended up being put in Vice. People saying that I was bringing back satanic panic, and I was making a big deal of nothing, right? That it wasn't like anything that could have led to racism. I was in no danger.
Gosh.
White people oftentimes don't have to think of the mortal peril that you're in a moment like that, right? You can, like, white people get the opportunity to just go lay in the woods in the middle of South Carolina. Hey, like, I'm just, you get what I'm saying.
Right.
And I'm like, that's not the experience of most Black people. I have to, if I see a Trump flag, I'm going to immediately assume that these people might try to murder me.
You see an American flag, you got to think twice.
Why are you so happy to be here? What's wrong with you? Why are you so happy to be an American?
I saw a tweet. This was a while ago. This was a couple of years ago, but it was like America's the only country where if you see somebody flying their own country's flag, you're like, that person's probably racist. Yep. All get out, and that's sad. That's sad that we've gotten to this point,
right? Like it's such facts. I mean. But yeah, so like that experience is another example of like how white people always think that they know how racism manifests itself. And I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about. The same way, I don't know how homophobia manifests, in every instance. I don't know how sexism manifests in every instance. I'm not a woman. I'm not in the gay community. I'm not trans. You know what I mean? I am a cisgender heterosexual Black man. I can speak from that experience, and I'm not going to belittle somebody or gaslight them about theirs.
Yeah. So another thing in your book you mentioned is that when you went to college, pretty much is when your pro-Blackness really started to evolve. And that was definitely a moment of my life where everything kind of shifted for me, because even though I grew up in a predominantly white town, I went to a predominantly white Christian college, which that's a whole different conversation in terms of white supremacy and whiteness. But when I got to college, I was actually exposed to like large groups of Black people my age, which I had never been around before. So for you, though, was there a very specific moment when you really started to shift into your more pro-Black stances?
I don't know if there's a specific moment. I think it was just, honestly being like around. Like, I have been around Black people, obviously, like, and I lived in a Black neighborhood. I lived in a Black and Latinx neighborhood, but it was about being around Black people who were unlearning, unpacking, deconditioning, things like that, right? So that's a very different environment, because when you're in the muck, when you're in the muck every single day and people are just like, when I was growing up, we were on Section 8, X, Y, and Z. We're just trying to survive. Nobody's having the time to sit down and dissect Assata Shakur, right? Like, and think about the works of Marcus Garvey and things like that. So when I got there, people talking that liberation stuff, I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm just trying to get this bread, like, trying to get this money and get out the hood. And then people are like, well, blah, 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 my brother. And by the end of college, I was damn near my brother this, my sister that. I was almost common. But at the end of college, you couldn't tell me anything.
I love that. That's oh man, that's really funny. It's just like a 4-year progression for you. You probably looked so different to the people that knew you.
Yeah. I mean, now I think people look at me different, or differently from where I was even like 3 years ago. I think that the world has changed so much in the last 3 years. So I've had to change with it, right? Like I'm intersectional way than I ever have in my life. I'm really pushing, for intersectionality and really like thinking about like trans Black women, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Was there a part of your book that was the hardest to write? Because you do recall a lot of things from your past. And I know that people don't realize sometimes the emotional trauma and emotional labor it takes to recall just racist situations and memories as a Black person from your past.
Yeah, I think for me, the hardest thing to write, and I think I say it too. The hardest thing was to write actually was the preface. You know, because I talked to the reader for a second, and then after that, I write a short letter to my brother. And you know, when you are Black, you know, I talked about this briefly. You constantly face your own mortality when you leave the house, right?
Yeah.
You know, actually, in you know what we've seen, especially this year, you know, with Breonna Taylor and historically with Fred Hampton and people like that, you actually face your own mortality at all seconds of your life being Black, because, you know, if they want you, they'll find you. But, you know, for me, that was really difficult because I was like, I said to him, I don't know if I'm going to be here when you eventually read it. And I really don't know if I'm going to be here when he eventually reads it. You know, the way America, I might be in a box at any moment, especially for trying to be a truth teller.
So I want to focus also on a concept that you brought up, but I think it's talked about often, but it's just that there's this mindset of whiteness kind of being synonymous with just education, with normality, just with mainstream. And do you think that that's ever going to change?
Yes, I do actually, because I think that it's slowly but surely changing now. Funny enough, right? Like there's a widespread understanding amongst, you know, liberals at least, that, oh, Black women, listen to Black women are you know, this and that and third. The issue becomes then we lean into like tokenization, you know, at that point. And so it's like you'll replace one thing with another, right? It'll be you know, Black people are the pillar of intellectual prowess, and then, you know, you get that like, how come every Black person we hire doesn't perform at, you know, the most optimal rate we've ever seen in our lives? So,
Right.
it's always an exchange. Always an exchange.
Right, for sure. And so I wanted to backtrack because you're saying, you know, people are now saying, you know, listen to Black women. Why do you think it has taken so long for them to actually do that?
Because it didn't matter before, right? Like they didn't have to. And I think that, you know, finally, you know, some other forces, be it Black men stepping up in support of Black women, white women stepping up. I think Black women just, you know, getting more of the platform that's deserved, and generally to be able to, you know, step up for themselves. There's kind of like this perfect storm. I also have a conspiracy theory actually as to how it's happening, but that's a whole nother conversation.
I want to hear it. No, I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
I actually think that a lot of the listen to Black women, because it kind of grew this past year, like in the last, you know, like I blew up. So the reality is, you know, Joe Biden is not going to be running for office again. So that means that they're going to run Kamala. And I wonder if they haven't like really pushed this like strategically to prepare people for the idea of supporting Black women when it comes to 2024.
Because she would be at the helm, basically.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a crazy theory, actually. I don't.
See.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, actually. And I think people are kind of preparing for that anyway. Like, let's just be honest. Biden is old. He's old. Like, there's no other way to get around it. The man's 78 years old. He's not going to be a two-term president any way you look at it, you know? So I don't think it's as much as I don't think it's much of a conspiracy theory as you think it is. I think there's a lot of truth to it. So we'll see. So do you have a favorite interview in your book? Because I love all of the interviews that you have, and I walked away from a lot of them taking little tokens of things that I resonated with and that really stuck with me. But is there one in particular that really stood out to you?
A favorite interview. I think a lot of people went off in it. A lot of people snapped. I wanted people to snap. But
they did, and I loved it. I
think if I had a favorite, you know who? I think two actually. One, I loved the interview with Terrell Alvin McCraney because it allowed me to hold myself accountable as well, right? Like, and I wanted to be really. I'm a pretty direct person, transparent. I think that's why people oftentimes relate to me and the things I'm trying to accomplish. So,
Yeah.
you know, so that was an important interview because, you know, I think a lot of white people were able to see themselves in my own mistake, right? When it came to a community that I don't belong to. Beyond that, let me think. Oh, Syra Rao. I think Syra snapped because Syra, you know, Syra is very, she's a leftist, and you know, she had a line in there that like was like, I think she said there's a through line from Susan B. Anthony directly to Nancy Pelosi, and and a lot of people push back like, oh, I don't know if you can keep that because it's a young adult book. I was like, no, I have to keep it, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality is it calls out so much. It calls out white feminism, but it specifically calls out white liberal feminism and this idea that, you know, white women in certain spaces are not problematic and not also a part of the problem. And I was like, that's a really important conversation for us to have.
Yeah, it is.
Even if just, yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, those were great interviews. So before we wrap up, I want to know, what do you hope the people that read your book walk away feeling or thinking? What is your intention for them once they close the book and finish it? What do you want them to feel or even do?
Let me see. What do I want them to feel or do? I think I would want them to to be ready to take action, right? Like, to get up, like, because the book is not systemic change. The book is a way to start reimagining and reframing the way you think and see, right? So then if you start doing that, then you hold yourself accountable for what you have been doing and then immediately start changing it. You know, like I tell a lot of people to read Hood Feminism by Nikki Kendall because it's something I try to read often because it helps me be like, okay, how am I creating space? How am I taking up space? Like when it comes to women, right? So and then I try to take action. Like, hey, okay, well, like if somebody recommends me for something, if you know, they're like, hey, do you want to talk at this thing? I'm like, well, you know, why don't you get a black woman to talk at that, right? Like, and that's action. And I want to start doing that from this book. Like, okay, like what can I do right now? What's the next step that I can take at this moment?
I love that. Well, tell my listeners where they can find you and where they can buy your book.
So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Fred T. Joseph. And the book is, you know, wherever books are sold. And I would say try to shop at a indie local bookstore if you can.
Yes.
Shop.org. Support your local bookshops. We need them more than ever.
Amen to that. Well, Fred, thank you so much. I really had a pleasure talking to you. It was wonderful. And I will be following you because I love everything you say on social media. I'm very aligned with your statements. And to the listeners, make sure you subscribe to We Need to Talk. And we'll talk to you again next week. Bye.